Hello and welcome to the video. I am Sandilya Krovvidi, working for iSecure Private Limited. In this video, we are going to speak about refresh identity cubes, which is one amongst the most important internal tasks of IIQ. As part of this discussion, we will be speaking about what a refresh task is, how to narrow down on target identities, various options that are available with the refresh identity cubes, and leveraging multi-threading to increase the performance of the refresh identity cubes. First, let's start with an understanding of the need for refresh identity cubes task and what it does. Refresh identity cubes task is a task which tries to update the identities to ensure that all the identities contain latest information. Identity cubes depend on a lot other information inside and outside IIQ to make sure that identity cubes contain the data that is calculated based on the latest of such data is a very important task in IIQ. Refresh identity cubes serves this purpose. There are always requirements wherein it is ideal to consider only a targeted population of identities for refresh. Refresh identity cubes provides us various ways in which we could narrow down on the identities that are going to be considered for the refresh. Also, as identity refresh being a resource intensive task, it is important for us to have some filtering mechanisms and avoid all those aspects of resources that could be avoided. Let's start with a discussion on such filtering mechanisms. Filters are a part of Sailpoint API which are very frequently used for searching and filtering purposes. Refresh identity cubes provides us flexibility to incorporate some filters to decide on the identities to be refreshed. We need not actually develop some code or filter or rule that uses filters over here. Rather, refresh task provides us a simpler way in which we could speak about this. For example, we could say name equals John.Dewey or department equals finance. This string filter is going to be compiled by the IdentityIQ to create actual filters that are part of Sailpoint API. Another way in which we could narrow down on the identities to be refreshed is groups or populations. We could mention specific groups or populations that are to be refreshed, and only identities that are part of such groups or populations are considered for the refresh. Time-based filtering of identities. Sometimes it would be useful for us to have a filtering mechanism that considers the identities based on their last refresh task. Two such options for us are refresh identities with their last refresh being before a specific date, or refreshing identities with their last refresh did not happen in last few hours. First option, where we mention an absolute stamp, is useful if we like to avoid those identities refreshed as part of some other workflow or task. The second option, where we mention the relative timestamp, is useful in situations where A refresh task is terminated because of some exceptions. In that case, we would start a refresh again, coding the number of hours before this task was initiated. That will help us avoid already refreshed identities and proceed with the remaining identities. Inactive identities exclusion. Yet another most commonly used option is to exclude the inactive identities. Identities that are marked as inactive do not usually change. Trying to refresh such identities would be an unwise spending of our resources. To avoid such wastage, we could use this option and eliminate the inactive identities from being refreshed. Some account aggregations have changes that would mandate a refresh. But in case we are sure that our current refresh task does not want us to deal with such changes, we could simply skip such identities. The next set of options that we are going to consider regarding the identity refresh task are about updates to the identity and the links. Nearly four options of Identity IQ will be addressing the challenge of updating the attributes and links related to the identity. Let's move ahead and discuss these four options related to the identity attributes and link updates. So the first option that we are going to consider is refresh identity attributes. Identity mappings define how all the identity mappings or identity attributes are created and updated. Refresh identity attributes option will ensure that all the identity attributes are updated as per the rules or mappings present in the refresh identity attributes. Sometimes it happens that a few identity attributes update happens on based on external web service or database calls. In such cases, it is ideal for us to have these options as part of separate refresh task. That will help us avoid the blockade of other related refresh works. The next option that we are going to speak about is the refresh identity entitlements for all links. Identity entitlement refers to entitlements of an identity that are part of various links. All such entitlements will be refreshed over here. This is usually used in conjunction with refresh links. The links related data is fresh from the target applications and the related aspects of the identity are refreshed. The next option that we are going to consider is refresh manager status. This option is used to refresh the manager status of the identity. It is common that a few operations depend on whether identity is a manager or not. To help such options with the latest data, this should be checked. The next option that we are going to discuss is disable connector lookup for managers. Manager correlation in IIQ happens through some configurations at the application configuration level. That can be through an attribute match kind of setting or a manager correlation rule. This option helps us to disable the calculation of manager using the manager correlation or manager attribute match. The next set of options that are related to the refresh identity cubes that we are going to discuss are policy violations. Every organization has a set of policies related to the privileges of an employee. More precisely said, a few states of an identity shall be perceived as policy violations. So the next set of options are related to the policy violation. The next option that we are going to consider is check active policies. This option helps us to decide whether we need to check or validate the policies, the active policies, against a specific identity or not. Keep previous violations. It's always possible that there are changes that are made to the identity and the policy violations are no longer valid. This option helps us not to remove such existing policy violations on the identities. Sometimes it's desired that we check only for specific policy violations. Policies to be checked option helps us to specify only those violations that are to be checked against. The next options that we are going to consider are related to the scopes. Assigning the scopes in IIQ happens through scope correlation rule. The option refresh assigned scopes helps us reevaluate the scope of the identity using the scope correlation rule. The scope correlation rule shall be evaluated against all the identities, and the scope of the identity shall be updated. The next option that we are going to consider is disable auto creation of scopes. It's a usual scenario that we do not know all the possible scopes. In that case, we cannot create these scopes in advance. IIQ helps us by allowing us to create the scopes dynamically whenever we find need for such a scope. Disable auto creation of scopes will help us stop the creation of such dynamic scopes. As part of the refresh task, it's always possible that scopes of the identities are changed. This might also result in some scopes which do not have any identities under them. Mark dormant scopes after refresh option helps us in marking such scopes which do not have any identities under them to be dormant or unreferenced. The next set of options that are related to the refresh identity cubes task are events related options. Events in Identity IQ refer to either lifecycle events or certification events. Based on the changes to the identity, lifecycle events are capable of triggering workflows, whereas certification events are capable of kicking off certifications. But the processing of these events happens only during refresh and only when the process events option is checked. The next option that we are going to consider is enable manual account selection. This option helps us send email notifications regarding the accounts that are not correlated. That way, we are notifying that there are accounts that are not correlated to any identity, and we are requesting them to correlate these accounts to some identity. The next set of options are related to the roles. As part of the role related options, the first option that we are going to consider is refresh roles and entitlements. As part of this option, various roles that are to be assigned to the identities are going to be recalculated and assigned to the identities. The next option that we are going to consider is provision assignments. This option helps us provision any permitted roles that are not yet assigned to the identity. Also, any other pending provisioning also happens with the help of this option. Sometimes the roles will be incomplete as a few application accounts are removed or identity has changed in such a way that the identity is no longer eligible for that role. In that case, if we wish to maintain the roles irrespective of such conditions, we can use the option disable deprovisioning of deassigned roles. The next option that we are going to consider is refresh role metadata for each identity. This helps us refresh the information related to the required and permitted roles of the assigned roles of an identity. The option that we are going to consider next is attribute synchronization. Sometimes we require that change in value of an attribute reflects across various target applications. For example, let's say an identity's location attribute value has changed. In such cases, we would like the target application to contain or to be updated with a new location value. In such cases, we can have target mappings defined at the identity mappings. These attributes could be synced across using the Synchronize attributes option. Risk related options. The next set of options that we are going to consider are the risk related options. As part of the risk related options, the option that we are going to consider next is the refresh identity risk scorecards option. With the help of this option, risk scorecards on the identity are recalculated and updated accordingly. The next option that we are going to consider as part of the risk related options is refresh group scorecards. With the help of this option, the risk scores of the groups can be refreshed. The next option that we are going to consider is about the history related options. For various reasons, understanding the changes in the identities is important. We need to store the various states of the identities over various changes. For example, for event triggers based on the attribute changes, this kind of change has to be recorded for the comparison of the new attribute value and the previous attribute value. For such reasons, with the help of the maintain identity histories option, we could maintain the snapshots of the identities. The next option that we are going to consider is about the refreshing groups. Promote managed attributes. Usually, the application accounts include entitlements. With the help of promote managed attributes option, the new entitlements are detected and promoted as Sailpoint objects and are added to the entitlement catalog directly. As part of various changes that happen in IdentityIQ, it is always possible that we can have a few groups in which there are no identities at all. This option helps us clean up such kind of unreferenced groups in the IdentityIQ. The next option that we are going to consider is about the logical apps. Logical apps in IIQ are dummy applications which are going to act as faces for three or more applications combined, and these applications need to be similar. The accounts in the logical applications or links in these logical applications are going to be calculated based on the accounts which are already present in the underlying applications. Refresh logical application links is an option that helps us refresh the various links that are related to the logical applications. The next option that we are going to consider is certification related option. As part of this, we have refresh continuous certifications option. Continuous certifications are year-long certifications or periodic certifications that have to happen on the identities. Refresh continuous certifications option helps us refresh this continuous certification campaigns that are in progress. The next aspect of the refresh identity cubes that we are going to consider is multi-threading. Refresh identity cubes being a resource intensive task, it would be ideal for us to optimize this task to ensure maximum resource utilization. There are two ways in which we could use the multi-threading. The first way being setting the number of threads, and the second way being partitioning. As part of the first option, setting the number of threads, we specify the number of threads that are to be used for the refresh task. This will be used only when there is only single host which is actually running the refresh identity cubes task. And IdentityIQ has a limit on the number of threads that could be used. The maximum number of threads that could be used over here is 10. This particular option of setting the number of threads could be used only when a single host is present. In case of multiple hosts, the second option comes to rescue. The second option for which we can use the multi-threading is partitioning. Partitioning could be used when multiple hosts are involved. The entire task will be distributed across various machines. All the identities that are to be refreshed are divided into small parts. Each part is going to represent a small set of identities in the entire set of identities that are considered for the refresh task. Each such part is called partition. all the smaller partitions are created and are placed in a global queue. Now, the available number of hosts are considered and the partitions in queue are offered to these hosts. Number of threads on each host could be decided based on the request definition objects. The request definition objects have an option specific to the refresh identity cubes task, wherein we specify the number of threads that could be used by the hosts for running the refresh task. Using this option or configuration, we could configure the partitioning on various hosts using the request definition objects. Thank you. Thank you very much for watching this video.